I was thinking, I watched this clip the other day. There was like different filmmakers and directors commenting on kind of where everything is right now, and I saw Scorsese like say something along the lines of all these new action movies in Marvel are just like not cinema, basically.
Yeah.
So as someone like in the industry, or like you definitely have your artsy takes
Yeah.
on film. What's your opinion on that?
Honestly, in my opinion, like if it's shot on like a movie camera, it's a movie. I mean, I guess like most of this stuff is done in like a studio where it's just like literally um, like a blue backdrop. But dude, yeah, I don't know. I like Scorsese has been on that whole like anti-Marvel stuff. But like, there's something to be said about like people watching stuff and enjoying it. Like, I never really got the purpose of gatekeeping like what's a movie, what's not. I mean, I don't. It's like I don't find this stuff interesting. I don't go and see it, but I know a lot of people that do. So if you want to,
For sure. Is there a difference between what someone would classify as like cinema and what someone classifies as a movie?
yeah, I would say like going to film school. Like everyone would consider that like a quote unquote movie, and then like the stuff that we were doing or like trying to do was cinema. Yeah, so it's like,
Yeah.
like movies that are just like two people talking and smoking cigarettes is like true cinema, and then like everything else or like all sorts of like action things like aren't real. Yeah.
And so what makes the difference is that simply through the eyes of the cinematographer, what is a cinematographer?
Oh shit. Um, yeah, it
I
can
mean,
be.
people
I
throw it
mean,
around, right? People throw around the term like cinematographer, director,
yeah,
like producer. Like what are all those
yeah,
roles? Like how do they how do they differentiate themselves? And you see a lot of times someone can even take multiple roles in a film, be the
right,
director and acting, or you
right.
know, I don't think that you can be a cinematographer and also be in the shot. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could. Um, yeah, I guess like it's like as I've kept working and like kept learning, like my idea of like what it is to be a cinematographer has like just kept expanding. Like I think when I was in school, it was like very like I'm gonna hold the camera or like operate the camera. I'm gonna like light the scene and just like that's my role. And like it's just on set this past weekend, and like now there's like all sorts of things that go into the making of the picture that you don't like necessarily think of as like the role of the cinematographer. Like in some points I was like playing into like the direction, like the screen direction of like blocking the actors and stuff like that, just because like obviously like the way that the actor's facing, the way the actor's moving through the space like is the image, is the moving image. So there's all sorts of blurry lines all over about where exactly the cinematographer, who's like the lead like picture maker, like in charge of making the moving picture, like where it ends and what your responsibilities really lie. So now I mean it's like I'm thinking about like all sorts of things. Like I guess that's maybe just me doing my job better, but I'm thinking about like what the actor's wearing, how that comes off, how that's interacting with the light, how they're moving through the space, all sorts of things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
How much do you think? How much emphasis do you think should be put on things like making sure that the color looks good on camera when you have more and more being done in post, more and more being done with CGI and probably like in the future AI as well.
Right.
Like
Right.
what do you think that things will have to slowly change to be more and more about the story alone and less about the picture?
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting like debate right now about like like just each year, each like new firmware that comes out for the camera. It's like you're getting more and more flexibility on like the latter end of production, in post. And so like when I was just shooting this video, there was a certain you just like setting the white balance in this one scene. I just didn't really have like an exact idea of where I wanted it, but we were shooting in a raw format, and so it's literally in that case, it does not matter. Just with the codec I was shooting, it literally does not matter the actual setting that you shoot it on, the white balance that you shoot it on. And so I, you know, rather than waste the time on set, I was just like, I'll decide later. So it's like this really weird debate of like, you know, how much you should like bake into the image and how much, you know, you should craft the image versus what people can do or what you can do on the back end. To me, I've always like, you know, um, kind of ties into the whole like analog versus digital debate when it comes to film too. And like people, you know, a lot of people on the film side, I kind of realized, you know, that like all my, you know, most of the films that I like really like are all like digital films. So I'm just like naturally I've gravitated more towards like digital cinematography. So it's strange to me to like cut it off, you know, just in production. You know, like there's some times where it's like clearly beneficial to, you know, nail down as much as you can in camera. There's other times where, you know, getting into the color room is just like, you know, the last step of the creative process. So yeah.
Definitely. In music, you have this, I don't want to say it's an unwritten rule, but it's kind of this understood concept that you want to kind of, when you're recording, you want to have the most accurate and clean signal kind of that you can get in that for that given situation, um, so that afterwards you have the most, you know, options of what you can do to it. You can
Right.
obviously put different effects on, just like in film. You can throw a filter or color grade it afterwards, and it's probably easier to do that to something that's just recorded in a very bland, clear way.
Right.
I think part of what you lose though is that there is an artistic nature to music and film where when you record in a less pristine, more expressive way, whether it's in audio or video, you there's this feeling of expression that you get from it that you can
Right.
lose if you try to do everything a little bit too clean. So
Right.
that's probably very similar in film.
Yeah, I think you have to strike a balance, you know, like I would never want to be, you know, like so like again, you know, I'm shooting raw a lot of the times these days on my camera and like, you know, I never want to get to a point where it's like I'm just pointing it, like just, you know, just send the camera up and just be like, I'll just do everything later. Cause like, you know, if you have the time, you have the know-how, and especially in color grading, you know, you really can like craft the image. Like you can just take like the flat raw image and then just, you know, craft as much as you want with the lighting, with the color. If you know, if you have a good base image though, and it's all predicated upon having the good base image. So I feel like it's the same in music production. You know, like you have to have the good recording. I mean, that's why like recording right is so important. And it's the same way in film. Like you know, if I have like my iris set too low on my lens, like and I like crush the shadows, like you're losing digital information in you know from the sensor. So like I can't, you know, just bump it up in post and everything's gonna be fine. So you still have to have like, you know, a baseline like intentional quality of like creating the image. But yeah, I mean I definitely don't want to get to a point where I'm like literally, you know, making the image in post. You know, I like it for like, you know, creative tuning because the other nice thing about it is it's like it makes it a more like generative creative process because it's like you know I might get to post and I shot it one way on set and I was like really into that and then like as my you know say understanding of the stories changed and I've talked to the director more or we want to kind of take it a different like tonal direction. I totally have that flexibility to like you know push it in a totally different way and sometimes you know we're in post and we find you know new things that we want to do and it's just new avenues so it's really like that's why I think I value like digital cinematography so much is like you know when you have like the film negative you know you can do the digital transfer and like you can color grade it but there is like you know a certain amount of just like a look from actually shooting on the celluloid like there's the look of the film stock that like you can't really take away so I think it can potentially block off some of those creative avenues that you have in digital. So
Definitely.
yeah,
Do you think that there's a kind of good reason why you don't see more directors or, you know, producers who work in film also doing more music videos? I feel like the two worlds are at least from my perspective, they seem like they're a little bit separated, right? You don't
Yeah.
see film directors really dabbling too much in music. Why do you think that is?
I think it's so one main reason is a lot of production people don't like music videos. I have friends like who are cinematographers who have literally said to me that they don't want to shoot music videos because the notorious reputation of super long days, super low budgets, even though all of the artists, or not all of the artists, but like the artists may be super rich, super low budgets, and just like brutal working conditions. So that's just like the one like logistical reason I hear a lot. Um, and then two, like yeah, why more like established directors I feel like don't dabble into music video. Sometimes it's a matter I feel like of what's popular. So if like you're doing a music video with a big artist like through a label, like the label's going to have their creative team that you know all have input into it, obviously because they're the ones that are putting up the hundreds of thousands of dollars for the video. So like they may be like, we want to see the artist performing the song a bunch, whereas the director's like, I kind of wanted a more, narrative things. So it's kind of like a push and pull with like where the money is coming from versus where the creativity is coming from. So I think I mean, there are a few cases of like some directors I really like making, doing music video stuff. And it is like, those are some of the best music videos. But I think that's why you don't see more of it, which is really disappointing. And I feel like that is like actually one of my main like motivations to do more in the music video space because there is like a certain lack of that. So
Do you enjoy more when the video that's accompanying the music is focused on the musician or when it's focused on telling a different story or maybe even the musician isn't in the video and it's simply telling the story of the song?
yeah, I think some of my favorite music videos are just like full on narrative. But like in a weird sort of way that it's not like a literal short film. It's more about like kind of crafting a narrative based on an idea in the song or even just like what the song sounds like. um, so like a lot of times, for example, when I directed a music video this past year, and the whole like inspiration for it, the whole like narrative that came to me was just inspired by like the feeling I got, from listening to the song, and then like from just that like initial gut feeling that was like expressed mainly through the vocals. Um, well, actually, and the music too, because there's like heavily distorted track. Um, that like inspired this like sort of narrative that kind of like teased out some of those ideas that have like from that feeling. So those are my kind of favorite. I mean, I guess you would call it narrative because it is like a basic narrative, but it's more about like kind of teasing out an idea that's coming through the music in some way. So,
When I look at a lot of more, I don't know, you could call it artsy movies or music videos, you often see, or I often see similar colors being used. I don't want to call it muted, but there is this kind of muted nature of, there aren't really like the primary colors don't really pop. It's kind
yeah.
of more subtle. What's the reasoning behind that as a filmmaker or as someone who's worked in color grading? Why do you often see those colors that, I would think would be maybe even attractive in some ways being kind of cut down?
Yeah, the low contrast look is really popular right now. Honestly, I think for the past few years, maybe since like, you know, kind of late, like 2010 kind of thing is when obviously the digital cameras started getting much more popular. And I feel like some of it was born out of, people just getting used to the new like digital medium because like, like the digital like log image that comes straight from these cameras is like very flat for on purpose. And I think it was kind of just like getting used to that sort of thing. I think now a lot of it, the low contrast look is just kind of like trendy. Like a lot of like the A24 movies like have that sort of muted, not a lot of contrast. Um, it's really just a trend thing as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, it fits some stories, but yeah, it can get a little overdone. I think somewhat recently I've actually started to notice, obviously as film has gotten more popular now, like Super 16 film, which is just a little bit more like punchy, like the Kodak stock is a little bit more punchy in terms of contrast. I'm starting to see more and more, like commercial stuff. That's kind of like pushing the contrast. You're getting like deeper blacks, brighter highlights. So yeah, I think it's ultimately like it's like a lot of the times one person drops an ad, whether it's like some major fashion brand or whatever, and then it's just a domino effect of different brands being like, we want it to look like that. So
Definitely.
it's just kind of like a domino thing.
Yeah, I feel like commercials definitely set, and any kind of media, whether it's on YouTube or film, once you have one person who, let's say they make it clickbait and that's super successful, everyone's going to try to imitate that, right? So
Right.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But it definitely does it feels like it gets played out and boring very quickly because of
Yeah.
just how many people are you know competing in
Right.
these media spaces.
Right.
Where does YouTube fall into this whole thing? Because right now there's kind of been this, what I've seen is this reinvigoration of the whole YouTube space. I feel like in the 2000s to 2010, it kind of went through this renaissance period, and then it kind of died out with, you had a lot of other social media companies coming front stage and taking over, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, and I feel like there's been a little bit of a phasing out of some of those. I mean, people are less active on Facebook now than they were. Instagram feels like it's just a reel of ads, and TikTok is now taken over.
Yeah.
So where does YouTube fall in the whole spectrum of content creation, and how does a director or someone interested in film use that when a lot of YouTube is very like Mr. Beast,
Mm.
clickbait, thumbnail videos with
Right.
not so much artistic content, but more just let's make as much money as we can, similar to a
Right.
Marvel film.
Right. Yeah, YouTube is a really interesting platform. I feel like for like new media stuff, because obviously, like when you get to platforms like Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that, so like when you're shooting on like a camera, like I own, you have to to fit it, to format it for that, you have to shoot in a 9:16 aspect ratio, which is like a little vertical sliver of the frame compared to like a full 16:9 frame. Um, so you're obviously limited on camera movement, framing. Your production design is limited because most of it is literally not going to be in the shot. So there's not as much creative freedom there. So the cool thing about YouTube is that it's like a platform that is just as popular, if not more popular, than some of these platforms. But it's like people like me, like you can exhibit the stuff like as it's meant to be seen. I feel like the other interesting thing about it is like people consume like such a varied array of like content on YouTube. So like people will literally watch a full length documentary like after watching a 2-minute video. So there's like, I feel like the range there. It's like such an interesting platform for like people into film and stuff like that, because you can put everything from your music video to your documentary on there, and actually like have it be true to its form. um, yeah.
Yeah, I think a difficult part of it though is, as an artist, your goal is, at least some of your goal should be, to be financially stable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like YouTube kind of caters towards this churning machine
Right.
of delivering content consistently, delivering content fast,
Right.
daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, within a period of time, that you're not just making one movie a year, you're making, or one documentary a year, right? It kind of caters to people who are able to make much more, just a greater quantity
Right.
of media.
Right.
And hopefully there's a way that over time artists can find ways to build either communities or have maybe better discoverability within the platform. Maybe there's a category that's created that's simply for documentaries, right? Or they try to do something like that that would enable people who are doing documentaries or more artistic style content to
Right.
get discoverability or get consistent exposure through the algorithm,
Right.
which right now I think that's kind of missing
Yeah.
within YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's why you don't see more, like directors, cinematographers posting their work. I mean, most of them, myself included, are posting my work on Vimeo. One, because the YouTube video compression algorithm is worse than Vimeo, so
Terrible.
yeah, you're getting more artifacting. And then two, yeah, like you said, it's all about like that's why all the vlog people started doing like the video a day things. And there's just like obviously like you can't make a music video a day, you can't make a short film a day. I guess you could if you wanted to, it'd be trash.
It'll be
So
bad.
yeah, so yeah, I do think that is like the main fault and why you haven't seen more people use it in that way. It is kind of disappointing because like yeah, it's like it seems clear that people are willing to watch every and any sort of thing on YouTube, but just like you know monetizing your thing as a creative, monetizing your video as a creative rather on YouTube is just like kind of nearly impossible as it stands. Like unless you're making something somehow that you can pump out weekly or daily or something. So,
I feel like you see a lot of pressure from that angle that's solely financial pressure, right? Whether it's from a streaming service that you're trying to put a film on, right? You're going to get pressure to maybe edit a film a certain way or take content out that they don't want you to have, or maybe it's, politically doesn't align itself with the platform.
right.
And I feel like that manifests itself throughout art. Like art is, it's kind of naturally this expressive form that is kind of anti influence, but at the same time, these platforms kind of force artists to accept the influence of the platform because of the financial aspect of it, right?
Right.
You're putting it on the platform to make money, right? You're
Right.
putting it on the platform to, build a fan base or get discoverability. So as a result, you're going to cave,
Right.
similar to like whether it's cancel culture or social pressure. You're going to cave because you don't have any other option.
Right. Yeah, and that's like the interesting thing is like, when I'm posting a video, like would it be nice for there to be, some monetization or whatever? Like, yeah, of course, obviously like to get paid for your work. But, to try to fall into like the YouTube, culture or like, play into the YouTube algorithm, there's not really incentive for me because like most of the point of me posting my work on my portfolio is like for it to be a portfolio so that people that want to hire me can check out my website, not so that I can get a million streams on my Vimeo, like short film or whatever. Um, so it's like I think that plays into it too is like there's really could I try to play the YouTube game? I mean, I guess, but it would take so much time. It would be so, radically different than like, how I need to approach, marketing myself through my portfolio. I would be like wasting a ton of time, trying to fit into the YouTube space or whatever. Um,
When you're building a portfolio, how careful are you about what you're putting there? I think a lot of artists are hesitant to put even maybe their best work on their portfolio because, one, they probably never feel done with it. I think it's a natural kind of common trend of a lot of artists that they just never feel finished with work. They always feel like that more could be done. They like to nitpick. So how do you select what you're going to put on your portfolio? And do you ever feel like a piece of work that you've done is complete?
Probably no to the last question, but there's always more that could be done. But as far as like kind of tailoring my portfolio, I try to not. I try, at least my approach is I try to show a range. So if you go on, I'm guilty of this too, to be totally honest. Like if you go on a lot of cinematographers, like front page of their website, and like the standard format now is like some stills from various different projects, and like 95% of contemporary cinematographers, it'll look pretty much the same. Like the stills will be very similar. I'm totally guilty of that too. If you go on my website, it's all like dark, bluish type tones, type stuff. So there's that. But I do have my other pages. I have like a page for my documentary. I have a page for the music video I shot and directed, which is like a totally different style from any of the stuff on my front page. I think so. That's my website, which I try to keep like a tad bit more professional. My Instagram. So Instagram is like another huge place for people in the visual arts or film or whatever. In that some people literally find jobs through it, and it's also a huge way to keep in touch with the people that you worked with, and they'll keep in touch with you, and like they'll recommend you to someone else, et cetera, et cetera. So that functions as like your Instagram page when you're like a cinematographer, for example. It's like it is a second portfolio, and so I try to keep that as my space where I can post where like whatever the fuck I want, because like I view that as like I can kind of play into like the fact that it's like it's just my personal Instagram. It's just like my personal thing. So I can post kind of here's the stuff that's like here's stills from a project that I shot. Here's like my chops as a cinematographer, but then like here's X, Y, and Z like creative projects, just like little photos. I edit like digital collage stuff and things of that nature. That also like play into my thinking as a cinematographer, as a DP. And then also just like maybe I post stuff about some like political stuff or whatever, and so it's like I try to keep that as my space where it's like a kind of a more expansive portfolio where you're like getting insight into how I think about the visuals, how I think about my work, and just like who I am as a person. So it's like a different sort of portfolio. It's kind of more freeing in that way. So
Definitely, I think that the social media kind of informal nature of it can kind of lend itself to be a little bit more freeing in some ways and expressive.
yeah,
There's not so much pressure. Like there is in some ways, like there's a lot of pressure to look similar to a website, to look as good as like the other people that are working there, but
right.
just the informal nature of social media makes it less pressure than I think a typical just display of work would be. Let's say you're
Right.
doing it in a show or just a portfolio. There's a
Right.
lot. I think there's more pressure there. When
Right.
you're looking at like other people's work, whether it's someone that inspires you or someone who maybe influences your style of shooting film, how do you kind of take inspiration while not trying to copy, basically just completely copying their style? One thing that I struggle with, definitely, and I think a lot of artists, regardless of what media they're working in, is you kind of start your career or your school period with, you have your influences. You have people that you look up to, people that you listen to, people that you're kind of basing some of your work off of, at least partially. Maybe you have one artist or one director, whatever, that you feel very kind of in touch with, and you're trying to use some of the tools or some of the stylistic pieces of their work in your own. How do you bridge that then to find your own style? I think it's difficult sometimes to feel, it's easy to feel lost, that you're just in this endless cycle of trying to make something that is as good as the person who you look up to. So how do you find your own style and then feel comfortable with what you've created and stop chasing kind of other people?
Right. Yeah, this is actually like a somewhat recent revelation that I've had. And it's, like the short answer of it for me is like really to just have no have no influences, have no like inspiration. Um, so, like that's not to say that I can't learn things from people and that I can't, like use the same sort of technique that people are using, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. But, I try to approach every project as like a totally new thing, and not only a totally new thing, but like a totally distinct thing. And then like kind of like a blank canvas, I guess is the easiest way to say it. So like I used to be really big on, here's, like Roger Deakins is a famous cinematographer, and he has a forum. He has a website where he literally like replies to people's comments, like, how did you light this? And I used to be really big into that. Like, oh, like, if you learn from some of the best people, then you can not like steal some of their techniques, but, try to accomplish the same sort of things to get, similar quality results. Um, then I realized that, like, that may work for some people and that may work for people that are just trying to like have a super successful career and make a living doing this or whatever, which I obviously is my goal in some way. But I think if I want to be creatively fulfilled, I just have to like totally abandon trying to like mold my work into the work of someone else, right? And so like I'd much rather kind of do my own thing and like create my own path, because the really interesting thing about film, and the reason why I think I got so interested in it, is because like it's not just photography, right? So where you're like you're just snapping a photo and then like here you have your photo, and then, yeah, you can edit it a little bit, but like there's your photo. Like film encompasses, not only is it, you're taking 24 pictures a second, but, there's all these things that play into it. So it's like a massively complex thing. Like, there's sound, if you're doing a music video, like there's the actual song, there's movement, there's all sorts of like, there's so many, compounding, different factors. And so it's like the perfect place where you can kind of just like build your own thing and kind of like tune your own thing exactly how you want it to be your way. So yeah, I mean, I feel like annoying when I say that, but I try to like when I'm shooting, I try to like totally free myself from, any sort of influence that's going to try to like to fit me into a mold. I really like to approach something and and kind of um, do it my own way, because another interesting thing in cinematography is like you know you step into a location and you may be the only person that's ever shot something there, shot video there, and so lighting, super complex thing, so many variables. uh, you kind of have to figure it out there. Like you may be there for a tech scout, a lighting scout, earlier at some point, but there's so many, based on where the window is, that's the angle affecting the angle of the sunlight, based on the time of day you're shooting. There might be a reflective surface, and so there's like so many things. So to try to copy and paste something into the same sort of context, it's just not going to work. Or it maybe can work, but you're going to spend a lot of time, like retrofitting something into something that maybe could be not only done better in a different way, but more creatively interesting in a different way. And so like when I directed the music video, I I could have shot it what's really trendy right now, super wide angle lens, just like handheld, just like pushing close up of the actors' faces. It's like super, you'll see that all over Instagram right now, especially with music videos. And so I told the two artists who I was doing the video for, I was just like, I am going to do a super crazy, like the image is going to look terrible but good. Like I was like the settings are going to be totally fucked and it's going to look terrible, but it'll look good, because that is like it'll match with the tone of the song, it'll match with the energy of the song. So I did a camera test with those settings in a rental house, and I posted stills from it on my Instagram. And some people, like one of my friends who's a DP, like, commented, he's like, why did you have these settings? And I was just like, I don't know, like I'm trying
Sounds
something
good.
out. And like it was exactly when I was listening to their song, when their album first came out, uh, you know, that was like this kind of like when I listen to music, I'm sure it's probably maybe the same for you. Like when I listen to music, like I get some, visuals, like I sometimes, have some I think of
Definitely.
visuals in my head. And so like when I was listening to that song, I just like there's just like the visuals I thought of were just like heavily distorted images, and so that's like what I ended up doing. I ended up like cranking the ISO like to as high as it could possibly go on the camera, um, and yeah, I just think it like it matched what I was trying to do. And I mean, maybe has someone done that before? I don't know, but I surely wasn't like you know influenced
You
by
weren't basing your decision off of
right
someone else's style. I think
exactly
one of the interesting things about film, and I'm actually a huge fan of film myself. Just like watching films, like I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself a film head.
yeah
Uh, I watch kind of like the basic directors I like, kind of I've probably what people would consider kind of basic stuff. But what's really nice about film, which is actually very different from music, is when you're composing music, especially in like the electronic space that I'm working in, you have a completely empty canvas. It's blank. There's nothing there. There's no inspiration of what you're looking at. The only thing that you have is, an empty DAW with endless possibilities. And one thing that's really nice about film that kind of, I don't know, attracts me a bit is the idea that as soon as you bring someone in that shot, you have something, right? You
Mhm.
have a subject, you have kind of an influence, you have your inspiration. You
right
don't need necessarily the same type of uh, motivation or mindset to get you into the creative space that you need to be to make something good, because you have a person on set. You have a light that you can just turn on to the right setting. And of course, you could be in a room that's completely empty and have, all the decision making be on you, what you're going to put in that set. But I think a lot of times with film, maybe it's outside, and then the setting that you're in is going to heavily, change the mood that you're in, and it's going to change how you're taking that shot, right? You have the
right
inspiration that's already there, and I feel like it's very easy to use that then, because it's right in your face.
right
I mean, you're looking at it, right?
yeah
It's through the
yeah
lens.
yeah yeah yeah, it's like don't want to cliche and say there's like endless possibilities, but it is really true. But yeah, in a way, I guess it's like a bit like simpler to get going because like yeah, like it always like impressed me like when you guys when you like when you open your DAWs or Ableton or whatever. It's like literally it's just it's like all right, you got to do something.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, makes it a bit harder.
Yeah, for sure. When, so I'm thinking to, some of the directors, right, who get a lot of credit for the films that I like myself. And I'm going to name a few directors and just give me your, the first thing that comes to mind as,
Yeah,
obviously this is very subjective and
yeah,
everyone has their own opinion, but you have a lot of people talk about Tarantino and, oh my
yeah.
God, Tarantino's movies, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
What do you think of him?
I like some of his movies. I think maybe he's got a little too self aware in his more recent years. But yeah, I mean like Pulp Fiction, like Jackie Brown, like those types of movies. Yeah, I mean I people are lying. I think a lot of people are lying when they say they don't like enjoy them. Like or that they're not good movies. It's like if you watch Pulp Fiction, like it's a good movie. It may not be like your favorite or like quite your taste, but like it's a good movie. He's obviously like a good artist. All things considered.
Kubrick.
Kubrick, love Kubrick. Another one like it's a big thing in film school. There's like this a subset of directors. Tarantino is another one of them, in Kubrick, where it's like you don't want to be cliche by saying you like them, but I mean, he made like a different movie, and like every movie was like a different genre for him, so it's like super impressive. Yeah.
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. I actually don't know if I've ever sat through a full Steven Spielberg movie. Not like, not for any reason. I just actually like don't know if I have. It's fine, I guess. I don't know.
Scorsese.
Scorsese, I think probably maybe the same thing, some of the same thing with Tarantino. Maybe not self-aware, but I know I didn't watch. Forgetting the name of it. It came out a few years
The
ago. It was like
Irishman.
The Irishman. Yes, exactly. Um, where it's like a little bit of like artistic excess going on, maybe like like the 3.5 hour movies. But yeah, same thing like Taxi Driver, great movie. Raging Bull, obvious great movies.
Yeah, I think something that's often overlooked is like you have these famous directors, right? And they have their styles, and you're gonna have people that absolutely love them, and you're gonna have people that criticize them simply because they're popular or
Yeah,
because they're famous. But at the end of the day, like I think there is something to respect about someone who is honest to their style, and I feel like with most of the famous directors, at least the ones that come to mind, like right off the bat, is they do have somewhat recognizable styles. Like if someone tries to make a movie that's like Tarantino, I think one that comes to mind is like The Nice Guys. I think that's what it's called.
mm,
That movie to me was it was just trying to be a Tarantino movie. And
right.
there's nothing wrong with that. I think that, when you're imitating someone's art, that's, I mean, it's the greatest form of flattery, obviously. It's
Yeah, yeah,
people are trying to be like you. But I think that there's something to be said for these famous directors, even if they do in later life kind of feel themselves a little
right,
bit too much, that they are making something that you can tell as the watcher that's them, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like yeah, even though I just said yeah, Tarantino maybe has become self-aware. I mean, at the same time, it's what I'm probably just picking up on is the fact that he stayed true to his style, and he's just been doing the same, not the same thing in a bad way, but he's been doing the same thing since he's been making movies. Um, I guess it's more. I guess then it comes down to more just like taste of like what you want to see. I think maybe that's like why Kubrick was so interesting to me is because I felt like every time I'm watching one of his movies, I'm like it's like a totally different experience. Like you can still tell it's like it's a Kubrick movie. Like it still has that distinct sort of quality.
Especially with the rooms. Yeah, you can
Yeah,
tell that's like a Kubrick room for
right, right,
sure.
right. Yeah, for sure. But like it's like it feels like a different experience, and I think I have less patience for people like Scorsese, where it's like oh, it's like another gangster movie, like like that sort of thing.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like there's really a new story where with someone like Kubrick, yeah, it's him because I feel like it's him because it's really, really good, kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah,
And
yeah,
because he's or was, rest in peace, quite effective in his ability to use really it's really the rooms. Like
yeah,
that's when
yeah.
I look at a lot of those movies is really his usage of space. That's
Right.
just like really the design of the set is clearly
Yeah.
very methodical and thought out, and maybe the set is one location versus 15 different locations where you have some directors that go kind of crazy with how many places they want to shoot at, whereas
Right.
a lot of Kubrick films seem to be more you know identifiable with the spaces that they use,
Right. Yeah.
motif based. Yeah, I think another thing that comes into play is you have oftentimes people will say that they want the director to make more of what they used to make, or they miss this kind of film. You see it in music too. You'll have people saying, why don't they make music like they used to make? Why did his
Right.
style change up? And I think that there's this external pressure to kind of basically the only way you're allowed to be honest as an artist, it seems, or be seen as someone who's making art that's coming from the heart, is if you make art that's similar to the first piece that made you big, right? Whether you're Tarantino or Scorsese, like there's this idea that if Tarantino was to make a movie next year that was some non-violent rom-com with no surprises, just kind of very, boring, expected. People would say, well, that's not, even if it was good, right? Even if it was a good film, people would say, well, that's not him. He's not being honest to who he
Right.
is as a director, even if like that's what he really wanted to make. And that's what he was feeling like making. So there's this weird pressure as an artist to kind of fill your own shoes
Right. Right.
in some sense.
Yeah, I think that happens a ton in music. I was just listening to the new Little Yachty album. I don't know if you
Oh my
listen,
God.
but yeah, it's like that exact thing. You know, he branches off in a totally different direction. I feel like I hear about that and see that with musicians all the time. You know, they try a new style in an album, and everyone just wants them to make the stuff from their first EP or whatever. Um, the interesting thing I think is that I feel like a lot of times or sometimes with cinematography in particular, with cinematographers in particular, it actually is the same thing but in reverse direction. So like in their careers, they'll start off, shooting, like little like indie short films, music videos, those sorts of things, indie features, um, and that's like where they'll be, they're most creative, they're most experimental, etc. And then as their career goes on, they gain some traction. Maybe the film shows at Sundance or something, and their career is kickstarted. They kind of settle into a more, like commercial type look. Kind of like a safer look. Um, yeah, so I think cinematography is a interesting like career where it actually like goes in the reverse. It's the same exact concept, just flipped in the chronology. Um, yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen to me. It suck.
Do you think that cinematographers don't get enough credit in film?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Um,
Do they deserve any credit?
no, we don't deserve rights. Um, I think when it comes to big like some of the directors we were just talking about, they probably don't get enough credit. Specifically, if it's a film like with a really distinct visual style. Um, but a lot of times, it honestly seems, and maybe this is just a result of me, like I follow a lot of like DPs on Instagram and stuff, so maybe it's just like who I'm watching, but it seems like the cinematographer actually like gets a lot more credit sometimes than they maybe do. Like on Kodak has this Instagram account, Kodak Shoot Film, which just like highlights projects shot on Super 16 and other film or 35. And a lot of times, like it seems like the DP is like positioned as like the main creative force. Even if they weren't, like you never know like about the project. Sometimes it's months of collaboration with the DP and a lot of pre-production. Sometimes literally, the cinematographer who was originally hired gets sick and they have to hire someone like not long before. That was the case with Mandy. I don't know if you saw that one. They
I don't
did
think so.
pre-production with like a full, the first cinematographer that was slated, and then they got sick or they couldn't do it for whatever reason. I don't remember the exact reason. And so they brought on the new person, and they had like, I think he had like a few weeks or maybe a month to prep for the feature, which is like a super short amount of time for such like a visually distinctive film. So anyway, yeah, I think sometimes, at least in the spaces I'm in, it feels like the cinematographer is kind of positioned as like, like the genius or whatever and something, but it's yeah, not a lot of the times the
When
case.
you, yeah, when you're constantly exposed to that area, do you find that it makes it less, I don't know, enjoyable to watch film because you're maybe obsessing over certain things? I find as a musician and someone who's constantly focused on certain things when it comes to audio, occasionally there'll be a song that I probably would like if it wasn't for the fact that I
Yeah,
was so involved in music. Is
right.
that the same in film?
Yeah, it can. I definitely, as I'm watching, I can it off in my brain sometimes or a lot of the time, but I'll notice like sometimes where a scene, say it's a night scene and it's like clearly like lit artificially, I like it'll like I'll just notice it in my brain the whole time and I like can't shut it off.
That's not right.
Yeah, yeah. Or like if something something is like very slightly out of focus to where like 99% of viewers won't even notice. But me, it's like, that thing in my brain again, that's like, and it like distracts you a little bit. Um, but I think sometimes it actually is cool because I watched a movie recently that it like the actual film itself was like it was fine, it was okay, but they had like one I didn't realize this going into it, but they had this like special rig built, and so like a lot of like the camera movement and like camera operation, like me and my roommate were watching it and just like we're like geeking out the whole time of like how they were doing it for like it was like a pretty mid film, but like so in some cases it actually works out. It makes me enjoy the film more where I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it. But yeah, you have to learn to shut it off, shut the critic off. But
Yeah, it's difficult because, now that you say that, you can definitely, like, I'm thinking back to, different things that I've listened to. And at the same time, where I'm probably overly critical in some ways of, certain genres, even, uh, especially I found in my later years, hip hop, which I grew up, basically that's what I grew up on, is hip
yeah,
hop. And as I've grown older, just being more and more kind of critical of certain sounds simply because I've been in production and exposed to production now for a decent amount of time. But at the same time, the music that I'm working in and that I'm listening to, probably 50% of the time, is this experimental garbage,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That honestly,
yeah,
most people probably just think it sounds like absolute, junk. It
right,
just sounds like distortion and,
right,
you know, just bad harmonic frequencies
right,
interacting with each other in bad ways and drums that are off tempo and all this, whatever. But I can appreciate it for, I guess, the same reason, which is why I don't necessarily appreciate the stuff that I should as much. So
yeah.
it's a weird relationship between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually I was having this conversation literally the other day. I was talking about I use you as an example of like where you would sometimes I feel like you would listen to music that's like it's kind of hard to like phrase it. It's like you're not like you maybe won't love like the actual song itself, but you're hearing the different production techniques that are going into it
Yeah,
and you're like, "Oh, wow, that's like a cool thing that they're doing." Um so like if you kind of like zoom out and like view the song as like a whole thing, you're like, "You know what? It's like X, Y, and Z techniques are cool in it. Like even if the actual song isn't like enjoyable to listen to or whatever. That's why like I go to a lot of like concerts, and like it's always tough to get people to come to the noise shows. But you have to appreciate like the different things that they're doing. When someone has like a full table full of their different like keyboards and I'm gonna mess up the name of some of the things, but like all the pedals and like all sorts of digital or analog equipment. Um, it's like you're learning to appreciate the process, like the actual like making process of the music, rather than like maybe like the actual sound.
definitely. I have a huge respect for people who do live shows just because of the pressure and kind of the natural nerves that come with doing anything in a live way in front of a lot of people. But for whatever reason, I just cannot get over the fact that it just sounds so bad in the
Yeah,
venue.
yeah,
I
yeah,
wish that I
yeah.
could experience like that kind of performative thing
Right.
in a setting where everything else is, not considered, which I guess is part of the hurdle because the space itself is performative, right?
Right.
It amplifies the experience, but there's just something I could never get over. I obviously enjoy going to concerts for like, having fun with friends and stuff,
Yeah.
but from like an audio standpoint, I don't know. I just could never get over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what it is.
Yeah. 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 I think
Uh,
that's the probably the benefit of like film stuff over going to live shows and music is because like me, I consider myself like, I listen to a bunch of different types of music and I know some stuff about, live sound or whatever, but I'm not as attuned to as you are. So, I go to a concert and, I can tell when it sounds like, better than another show, but sometimes I don't have as good of an ear of like, like, oh, the mixing was a little off tonight, something like that. Um, but with film, like film is so, like it's such, I don't want to say like it's a more accessible medium than music, but it's like accessible in like a somewhat different way. Whereas like you can kind of like, it's easier to, like enjoy like a film as a whole than it is for a lot of like different types of music, and specifically like live music. Like you go to a film at a theater, and like even if it's not, the best movie, you're not like having a bad time, even if you're like a huge film person, like, or like, a ton about film. Whereas with music, I feel like, yeah, like, some audio heads, you like might actually have like a bad time at a show if there's
Yeah.
bad sound.
Just overly critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one area where film, and it actually is tied right into audio, where film kind of falls short, especially when you try to enjoy it at home, is there is a, with the way that the audio in film is done, it's made for a sound system that has, up to 128 channels
Yeah.
in it
Yeah.
with, Dolby Atmos and, all these other formats. And when you listen to it at home, it gets mixed down to,
Right.
you know, a 2 channel system or maybe a 2.1, 5.1 system. So you
Right.
have, maybe the vocal, sound would be coming from 10 channels in the theater, but that's getting mixed down. And then you have, all the loud sounds to sound too loud, and all the, then you're listening, I can't listen to what they're saying. Then you have
Yeah.
to turn
Yeah.
the subtitles on, and
Right.
you have
Yeah.
this whole trend of more and more people watching movies with subtitles because
Right.
the audio of the vocal is too low, and all these things are kind of tied together. But it's, I don't know, it definitely feels more accessible, at least that you're somewhat getting a sense of how it was intended to be enjoyed, where there definitely is this bigger gap in music because of the problems with the venue. Whereas in
Right.
movies, if you go to the venue for the movies, it's like as close to being perfect as you could probably get,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess maybe half the screen could be, bad,
Right.
like the projector screen, but like the likelihood of that is much lower than going
Right.
to a concert venue and the guy next to you screaming in your ear about, his ex-girlfriend that broke up with him and now he's
Yeah.
drunk at the concert,
Yeah.
and it's like he's screaming at the top of his lungs. So
Yeah.
it's a cool thing though to experience things live,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I always, I've always heard, and I mean, it's definitely true for me, but I don't know if it's true for everyone, that like people are much better at detecting, like bad sound rather than like bad, slightly worse visuals. So like, if there's like bad, mixing in a movie, or like something was recorded poorly, it's like even like, like the average like viewer can, yeah, they'll notice it. They'll be like, what, like, yeah, turn on the subtitles. Like, I can't tell what they're saying or something like that, or like it's too low. Whereas like it seems like it takes something like pretty egregious for, when it comes to visuals. So like I always think of the Game of Thrones, the classic episode where it's too dark,
the
and so
black
like,
episode, yeah.
yeah, so like like I feel like you really have to do, like, you can do weird stuff and that's like won't, but like if you like really push the boundaries, that's, I feel like you like really have to do something drastic for someone to, the average viewer, to pick it up.
Yeah, I wonder if that's something that's natural to kind of the biology of humans, if it's natural to kind of the tolerances that we have in our eyes versus our ears,
Right.
or if it's something that's more subconscious. And,
Right.
that'd be an interesting thing to understand. I'm not sure. Because if you think about it, it would seem that your eyes would be almost more sensitive in a way.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Although they do blur things, right? There's the
Yeah.
natural blur effect.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's interesting. It's also interesting to think about because it's while it's very noticeable when someone does something wrong with audio, it's also very easy to fool people with audio.
Right.
You can, Foley engineers, for example, their job is to, create sounds that look correct,
Sure.
but they're not actually those
Yeah.
sounds.
Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I don't know what, it would be interesting to, I'm sure there's been some work done on it, but it's like really, it's sometimes it surprises me so much. I'll be like watching a classic example is you're watching a movie and there's a night scene and the like what's supposed to be the moonlight, it's always pretty much always a movie light, like a fake, light. It's always, maybe not so much anymore, but most of the time it skews blue. And like moonlight is not, you go outside, there's not like a blue, glowing light like shrouding everything. You know what I mean? And so like when I watch it, I'm like, oh, like it's like their light is so fake. And like, my parents will
Yeah,
be like, what do you mean? And I'll be like, they're like coated in this like blue glow when they're outside. That's like not, it's so fake. But yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know why. Cause yeah, you would think like, I don't know, you would think that like your visual field would be more sensitive in some way. But I think there's some way in which like I don't know if there's an example of this in audio, but like the way in which like film grammar, just like through the years, like, like we've just always lit night scenes like that. Like moonlight has always been blue in films. And so like there's just some way where it's like worked into like your visual processing, not your literal visual processing, but like kind of your brain understanding, like the visual stimuli.
definitely.
It's like which is kind of interesting. Yeah. It's like, I don't know. It's like kind of like stems from like culture, like film grammar. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah, I always notice that in scenes with a candle
Yeah.
or a lantern.
Yeah.
You'll
Right.
have someone holding this tiny little, micron
Yeah.
sized little candle
Yeah.
with their hand in front of them, and somehow their face is completely bright.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole room is bright.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like this is it's the most obvious, like, egregious fallacy that I've ever
Right. Right.
seen.
Right.
But yeah, it's probably just like you said, it's probably a trend, no different than someone using a filter to make radio voice sound deep and
Right.
boomy. It's
Right.
just a natural thing. It doesn't sound natural at all. And if you
Right.
think about it, it's like no one's voice sounds like that. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's fake,
Yeah.
right? But it's probably just a standard that is done. It was probably originally done because the media itself was limited,
Right.
right? You couldn't have certain frequencies or whatever. Similar to like in old movies, you would have to actually hide the mic on
Yeah.
set,
Sure.
right? Because it was a big physical thing.
Yeah.
You weren't able to have mics on every actor.
Right.
You have like the little mics that you can just tag on their clothes. You can have like 5 different mics on a scene
Sure.
without any problem now.
Yeah.
But 50 years ago, at this point, like even more than 50 years ago, that was not possible. You had to hide this gigantic thing
Yeah.
behind some plant on set and hope that you were picking up the sound, and
Right.
then all the actors had to project,
Right.
right? And now the actors are able to speak really softly and with all the
Right.
emotion that they have. Um, but yeah, it creates different trends, and then it's interesting to see how those trends are or are not picked up by the audience, like you said.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes because, I kind of was talking about this before, but like each year, the digital cameras get more and more, like basically the dynamic range increases, with each iteration. So like we're able to push like more and more into each direction, like way into the shadows and way into the highlights. So like, yeah, I mean, like the early digital cameras, they were particularly bad. So like film is like notoriously good at capturing the highlights. Like it's very hard to like overexpose on film stock. Whereas the early digital cameras, it was like super easy. Like you get the clipping in the sky super easy. So like then it affects your practice. So like then you have to put a bunch of ND over the windows or put diffusion here and there and to cut the light down so you don't get that like harsh video clipping the highlights. And then also like in the Game of Thrones example again, like we can go like way deep into the shadows, for better or for worse, than we could before. So like you can light a scene, maybe not with literally just a candle, but like maybe with a triple wick candle, and
Yeah.
you can like actually get a usable amount of information, like digital information. and so like you can push things to like a totally different way. So it'll be interesting to see how, like practices evolve, and then like what becomes, like the more normal. Like I could see, for example, to return to the moonlight thing, I could totally picture, like you already see it now sometimes, of like moonlight not being, blue anymore in movies, because, like you can just like with your sensor, it's sensitive enough that you can kind of get like the more actual, like natural kind of glow, so kind of look. So yeah.
Yeah. I think that to that point though, I think people are attracted to a little bit of the fake look.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
sometimes reality is to reality. People want these enhanced
Right.
versions. Like
Sure.
that's why you color grade too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So yeah, that's like an interesting thing that I feel like, if you're working with a client that has only worked with like, super small, like say like a one man band type person who just has the camera and like, maybe one light, versus then now you have like a gaffer with a, a full lighting kit, and you have a cinematographer who's used to lighting things with multiple fixtures and not just like available light. It really is like, like you realize how often you like really have to you really have to like craft like the image to like create something, like you really have to, it takes a lot to create some of like these looks that we like, and even a look that may appear supernaturalistic was actually like super lit, not in like a lit way, but like in like, it took a lot of lights to do. Yeah, I feel like that's a big thing that people don't realize. Some of the stuff they're watching, um, it may appear like it was just literally a person with a camera, but like there's a whole lighting team, and it's like, I think a lot of people don't realize the scale. Like the music video we were doing this weekend, the artist, I don't think was used to, like working with a full lighting package and stuff. So just like, I think for them, it was a big, learning curve of sorts, or just like learning experience is a better way to say it, of just like, yeah, I'm like, we have to set up like 3 or 4 different lights in here and like modify them in all sorts of different ways with diffusion and like flags and stuff like that. And it takes an hour and a half to light this setup where they might just be used to like someone just throwing like an LED tube behind them, and just like calling it a day. So
yeah,
yeah.
I think that's a natural kind of part of honestly just being ignorant of
Yeah.
a certain art area.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily understand or appreciate all the work that goes into
Sure.
what, some media takes,
Right.
whether it's a video or audio or film, whatever it is. I think that
Right.
we take a lot of these things for granted naturally because, I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
Right.
I mean, it's entertainment at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like it's not a educational, package when you're
Right.
looking at a YouTube video. You're just
Yeah.
looking at, well, I want to watch my 15-minute video. I don't care if 500 people worked on it or 5 people worked on it.
Right.
I'm
Right.
just watching it,
Yeah.
So I think it'll
Yeah.
be really interesting to see where that all goes now that you have this kind of renaissance of AI happening, and you have more and more people being aware of the tools that are available to other people. I think in film it'll be super interesting because I could see, maybe not now because I think we're still limited with some of the technology with the hardware to be able to create video, but soon enough we're going to be making full films that look real, that look like people are acting them in the just simply using AI.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I saw, I think last season in The Mandalorian, they had like a deep fake of Mark Hamill.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, did it look like a deep fake? Yeah, it looked fake, but it wasn't off that much. It was
Right.
it was pretty good, and that's now. Like, what is it going to be 10 years from now?
Right.
Right. I think there's definitely potential for music, definitely. movies will probably happen later than music because of the hardware involved, but
Sure. Yeah.
you'll see movies that are not even shot. It's just
Yeah.
complete. I mean, some of these Marvel movies are already like that. I mean, sure, it's not the people in it,
Right.
but the whole background, it's just a green screen, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting, to when that sort of stuff starts coming onto the scene, to so like it's always an uphill battle now. Like I work with my friend Lilac, and we have like we try to have like a sort of like production company of sorts, and it's always like an uphill battle to kind of justify yourself and why you may need thousands of dollars to do it, because again it's like yeah people may be ignorant, no fault to their own, of just like all of the work that goes into it, all the equipment that goes into it, and just how much like labor costs and stuff like that, because it's specialized labor, of course. So it'll be really interesting to see how like yeah, when you literally can generate when you can generate an AI music video or an AI anything, how that's going to affect these sorts of, calling them negotiations is weird, but that's like kind of what it is. It's kind of like a back and forth where it's like, okay, we kind of need like, 2,000 more dollars. And someone's like, okay, well, like, can't you just do it for this? And we're like, well, no, because, this costs this much. It's going to take this much time, all these sorts of different reasons that you have to use to like really justify yourself. Um, yeah. So I think, I don't want to sound like a boomer and say it's like potentially dangerous, but it'll definitely be like an interesting conversation about what a company can produce on their own, like a client, say making a commercial, versus what like an actual team of people can make, and like how to how to deal with that interaction and that give and take. Yeah.
I think it also could be a tool, right? I think about, myself and some of the limitations that I have physically to make
Yeah.
music, and kind of the appeal that AI created music has if I could have control over certain things or use it for just certain aspects of the music creation. For example, one of the tough things about not being able to use my hands is I can't improvise easily,
Yeah.
right? And improvisation is like a huge part of making music, especially when you want to come up with interesting melodies. Sometimes you have to just kind of let God, if you want to call it God, kind of
Yeah.
flow through you, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
influence how you're playing, and then use kind of whatever comes from that to create
Right.
the idea. And so maybe taking a song that is maybe 75% the way done, but I don't have a certain riff or a certain melody that I'm looking for, and using AI to create a MIDI roll of notes, or create that kind of sequence, or generate a bunch of sequences, and then I'll select which one I like, maybe tweak it a little bit, adjust a note here and there, and then be able to use that. I think, to me, that's still being the artist,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
That's not, uh, I don't know. Doesn't seem like cheating.
I think yeah, I think people are starting to see some of that potential of like the actual customizability with the Chat GPT stuff, where it's like they're seeing the ways in which the increased specificity and the input tailors the output obviously to exactly what you wanted. Whereas something like um, I mean, I guess it's the same with like Mid Journey and things like that. I think it's a little bit more easily recognizable in the Chat GPT stuff. But yeah, something where like you're seeing a direct, like easily understandable connection between that. Like, okay, the more I actually put creative input into it, the more it's going to get like what I want, or maybe create something that's like a new layer of complexity, like building upon my idea in a way. So yeah, there's no reason why it has to be mutually exclusive. There's still the artist behind it. There's still the person inputting the prompt. You have to put the input in to get the output. So
Another common criticism of AI, at least it seems like a criticism, maybe it's more of a fear, is people say that is dangerous. Do you think that
Mm.
there's like validity in saying that AI is dangerous?
Like I don't know. It'll be interesting, with like things like Web3 stuff, about like art ownership and like things like that. But whether I mean whether it's dangerous, I'd still like to think that people will be able to recognize a sort of like human value, like when you still have a human attached to the artwork, even regardless of what degree of AI is playing into that artwork. But I feel like at your base level, people are still going to recognize like the human artist that's there. So like I think claims of it being like dangerous, as if like AI art is like going to make like painting irrelevant, or like say like NFT art irrelevant or something like that. I I don't see why all of a sudden we would forget the value of someone actually like making it, or kind of like being the designer themselves. So yeah,
So
I
what
think
if you
this
take a
claims
step back
yeah,
from the art world and you
yeah,
look at in general society and how AI is impacting that? Not even AI, but just kind of the replacement of human production with robotic production and
yeah,
automation.
yeah,
Unfortunately, in society, there's a lot of value put on production, right?
right,
It's a dollar sign at the
yeah,
end of the day.
right,
And if you can replace a large cost with a smaller cost in form of robot, or vice versa, taking a robot out and putting a cheaper person there, a company
sure,
will do that because it makes
right,
sense for them. As a result, you have a workforce that's slowly displaced, especially making physical things,
right,
and you have an increased population of people that arguably don't really have a purpose
right,
in sustaining society. Everything that they do is basically either creative or a service to other people, or maybe even useless.
right.
So, how do you maintain value to those people when the jobs, at least in countries like the United States, are slowly becoming increasingly unnecessary, it seems?
Right. Yeah, I've always thought about this in the same way, and I guess the way I think about it is like when we're losing, say, like the job of like the classic example of a cashier, to like a kiosk, at a fast food restaurant. Yeah, and people, they always cash it out in terms of that. People are losing, their job. They're then like unemployed, have no value or whatever. I always think about it like you can flip it and think about it in terms of like that's actually like a form of like development or progression. Like like in my eyes, like you know I would wager a guess that like the amount of people that like truly like want to be and like love being like a cashier at a fast food restaurant is like extremely low, and they're doing it to reach some end. And so if we can progress in a way at which people don't have to do menial labor, right, and they are free to do like quote unquote more important pursuits, or say like creative pursuits, all those sorts of things, like to me that's like a clear sign of like society's progression, right, rather than regression. So I think about it in the same way of like if we can the more menial things we can automate to make room for actual human things to be done, um, that's just like clear progress to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, unfortunately, one of the realities of our society is that you have the education system that is basically feeding people into, it seems, a system that is not based on their true human value. It's simply based on how much money they can make, or
Right,
whatever metric you want to give success,
right,
that success is labeled, uh, which seems that it doesn't align with the value that I would agree with that you just presented of a human's value.
right, right. Yeah. I feel lucky in that way, even though I'm still paying for it. But like being able to go to school to, like actually, whereas, it's not like a clear pipeline. It's kind of more of like, here's all these things about film, and then like, good luck, try to do something with it, try to make your own path. But I feel grateful that I wasn't, into, the pipeline of studying, I don't know, use any example of like a more standard major.
Economics. No, I'm just
Yeah, economics. Yeah, yeah, and like and then I can go work at J.P. Morgan, and then I can, in 5 years I can bump up and like kind of follow that linear progression. I think there's so much value, especially like when it comes to talks about like the value of college, you know, price notwithstanding, but like, there's so much value in like, kind of like building like building like your base as a person, and like building like your influences and like your knowledge base and your creative influences and all those sorts of things, and then kind of like creating a like opening the range of like things that you can do and like giving you different abilities. I think there's just a huge value in that.
how do you navigate, let's say you weren't in the situation that you're in now, let's say that you hadn't gone to school yet, how do you navigate that pressure, that overwhelming pressure that young people have to follow the track, to be part of a system that I feel like most people at least acknowledge isn't really that good for the mental state of society. Like if you look at, you take a step back and you look at simply, I mean, we're kind of going a little bit philosophical here, but, looking at it from a philosophical standpoint, like, yeah, you're probably not going to be happy if you follow
Right.
the track that people give you to quote unquote success, depending on what your metric for happiness and success are.
Right.
But I think it is pretty, well understood. I mean, you go to a random school, people aren't happy to be in school. They're happy to
Sure.
be with their friends. They're happy to be
Right.
partying and, getting drunk and shit. And
Yeah. Yeah.
people are happy to be maybe in a class that's maybe super interesting, but oftentimes isn't even in the major that they're in. Or
Yeah.
uh, so how do you navigate if you are young? How do you navigate that environment?
Right. Yeah, it's really tough. Like I always tell people, when I talk about the same sort of thing, I always say, if I could, if it ever came up where I was like talking to, say like a high school senior or just like a high school student in general, and they asked me for advice, I would always say now, looking back retroactively, I would always say to take a gap year, if you have the means to do so, where you can, work a little bit or whatever, or maybe not work, take a year or two, and like, explore different things, even if you do nothing, like even if you, just do things you enjoy for a year and, just figure stuff out. Um, like I think, trying to fit everyone into the, like I don't want to, get to like whatever about it, but, like the capitalist pipeline of like, go straight. Yeah, right. Yeah. Go straight into, like your job vocational training, which is a lot of what, college is about, and then just go straight into your, linear career path. Like it's out of the people I know, and again, maybe it's like, it's skewed because I'm in like a creative field or whatever, but like the amount of people I know that are like meant for that one, pipeline, that one path is like very low, compared to the amount of people that I meet that I think are like perfectly fit for that. Um, so that's always my thing, I'm always about, now that I look back at, kind of my own path, I kind of look and I think like the best value I had, through my education and just like through my experience, learning and stuff. And even now is like, just like consistently, just constantly widening, my experience. And like, when you widen the experience, it's going to, like create new paths, and it's going to create, opportunities or just like direction that you probably wouldn't have thought of or knew you'd be into or any sort of thing, if you just try to fit yourself into the mold.
Definitely. I'd 100% agree. I think that the idea of taking a gap year is often, I mean, it's overly stigmatized,
Yeah.
especially because of the kind of standard career track that people like to take. And also because of the age aspect of things. I think
Right.
that there's this rush to be in college, not even just because you're expected to go, but because you want to go, because you want to be around people your age. You want to be, you know, approaching that, magical year of 21 in the United States where you're finally an adult, with people that are your age, right? You don't want to be passing that before you maybe even get to college. But I think that if we were to take an honest look at our society and the direction that it's going, I think that more emphasis needs to be put in people really taking the time to do kind of a self audit of sorts and really take the time to grow when they're young and maybe figure out what they're truly meant to do, because over time you're going to see more and more jobs being displaced. You're going to see more and more production value from each person because people are going to have more and more tools. So the amount of work that each person is going to be able to do is going to go up, right? Making the competition even higher for certain jobs, and the amount of jobs will likely go down. And with that, you're going to need people that find purpose and true purpose, and they're going to need to find it with the current system of education at a pretty young age, right? I mean, 18, 17, 19, you're not even, I mean, to be honest, you're dumb. Like, even if you're really smart, and a lot of, young people are smart. I don't think that there's anything limiting about the age when it comes to just pure intelligence. But from a standpoint of your understanding of your life and your ability to reflect, I think that that's one of the biggest areas where it's hard as a young person to be able to do that, because you're not looking behind you. You're looking ahead of you. You're excited for the future, right? Your dreams haven't been crushed yet, right? By the bad establishment. Right? So I think that there'll be an interesting kind of clash eventually of people realizing that it's more important than they realize to be worrying about those kinds of things. Right.
Yeah. I think back to when we were freshmen. It's like you don't realize that at the time. I guess your parents tell you, but like you don't realize how like limited your worldview or like your knowledge is at that time. And I guess as maybe this is trying to make a weird connection, but like like as technology progresses and like stuff we were talking about like before, like AI and like and cameras getting more more sophisticated, and like with each passing year the stuff getting more and more accessible at the same time, I think it'll be interesting to see the ways in which that directly plays into the younger generation, like younger people just in general, kind of getting that expanded worldview, getting that expanded knowledge base, just from the tools that are more accessible to them. Like my camera is like a professional like digital cinema camera, but it's like really not that expensive, like all things considered. You know what I mean? It's like it's very accessible compared to on $100,000 camera package, which was like the standard 5 years ago. So, and like things like I can just go on to OpenAI and like use some of their tools for free. I think more and more people with each passing year are going to be exposed to so many different creative opportunities or intellectual opportunities that have just become so much more accessible. And so just realizing all of the different options that are available for them, the things that they can do.
Definitely. And the ability to learn and to educate online and at a young age is increasing. So that is definitely a good thing. People are able to make, educated decisions without needing to go to a library. Not that the library is a bad thing, but given the current state of information, you could easily look at a library as being very incomplete compared to the amount of information that you're able to, find online, even on, something like YouTube, there's, you want to learn how to do anything, just look up a quick video,
Sure.
change a carburetor, do it on
Yeah.
YouTube,
Right.
how to, you know, how to fix a washing machine.
Yeah.
Just do it on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Or even more complicated subjects on philosophy or, intellectual, serious intellectual things.
Right.
There's YouTube videos, professors doing lectures, and
Yeah.
there's all these tools. So it's increasingly available. And I think that young people they're dumb in some ways, but they are pretty good at using the technology for a means,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And hopefully they do so in an educated way as
Right.
things progress. I noticed, totally off topic,
Mm.
that you are now vegan.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw
Oh,
some
shit.
shots.
Oh
Okay.
shit.
No, I'm not. I'm
Cool.
not gonna throw shots. Tell me the motivation personally to make a dietary change in your life. Because when I was living with
Um.
you, you weren't no
Yeah.
vegan.
No, that's true. I'm trying to think of the original. Okay, so the original motivation um, that started when I just stopped eating meat. I was dating someone at the time who was
It's
vegetarian.
always a girl. It's always a girl.
Yeah.
No, I'm just
So
kidding.
okay, let me back up a little bit from that. So originally, I was a philosophy minor, and I spent a lot of time, doing philosophy. I ran a reading group for a few years, so I spent a lot of time, reading that. So then I'm used to I'm looking at things like critically, stuff like that, thinking things through. And then, I was dating this person that was vegetarian, and it was kind of like a blind spot of sorts. Like it was kind of just something I had never critically reflected on. And I felt like it was the first time that I was like, yeah, maybe I should think about this. I wasn't making like a complete judgment, either way. I was just like, yeah, like this is like, it's a big part of our lives. It's like what we eat every day, let me just think about it. And then, reading, a lot of the moral philosophy on it, stuff like that. I was like, this is like a pretty, at least to my mind, it's like a pretty solid case against it. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I pretty much just decided at some point that I just didn't want to eat meat anymore. I was vegetarian for a while, and then I was like, you know what, I don't eat the other animal products that much, and like, if I really believe that, things like animal exploitation, or just like, I won't even call it exploitation because some people, disagree, but like just like use of animals, in general, like if I agree that that's unethical, then it's like, okay, I might as well, lump, eggs and stuff like in with that, because at some, basic level, it's, you're still like using, like you're still like owning the chicken or the hen rather, and, taking their product or whatever. So yeah, that was the motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I see that. I think that it's interesting to hear people's kind of reasoning behind different diets. I think, some people do it for health reasons.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people do it because they're, I don't know, seemingly coerced by their surroundings, or
Yeah.
they're convinced by, I don't know, it's almost become a sort of religion of sorts
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
be vegetarian or vegan. I think vegan more so than vegetarian, I think,
Yeah.
has this stigma around it, and I don't know, it seems like more of a cultish thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, there's definitely, purely from a philosophy standpoint, there's definitely an argument to be made,
Yeah.
to do certain things with your diet. But me personally, I just like chicken too much.
Yeah. Oh,
I
I
mean, it's
know.
so good, dude. How can you not eat it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's an identity, so in case of like any, identity, people can take it to the extremes, and people can, make it their whole personality, so to speak. I think the interesting case with veganism stuff is like, I think for me, it's like, for me, it's like my motivation behind it isn't like, I'm gonna, so I can hang out with like the cool vegans or whatever. Because like 99% of the people I know aren't vegan. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even though I live in New York, like pretty much everyone I know is not. So it's not like I'm trying to be part of some like in crowd, or I'm like gonna post on, here's like my recipe that I made or whatever, to get some followers or whatever. um for me, it's like, I think, why it's more pressing to me, and why I post about it sometimes, is because, at least in my case, I felt like, some of the, a lot of the information I was fed. I always feel like I sound like a conspiracy theorist when I say this, but I'm not trying to be. Like, some of the information I was fed, and like, like nutrition information, and like, like ideas about where meat comes from culturally. Like, everyone thinks of the small family farm, that's like, butchering their 3 cows a year or whatever, or something silly like that. Like, and then I felt like a little like stupid, almost, like when you see like the classic YouTube documentaries of like footage like that they smuggled out of a, worker in a factory farm. And like I felt like deceived, right? I felt like stupid in a way that I was like, yeah, this is obvious. Like, like Tyson Purdue, like they own, it's like Tyson Purdue and one other company, I forget the name, like they own like 95% of all, like industrial agriculture in the United States, at least. So it's like, yeah, it's like I felt, it's like whenever, the same way whenever you find out, that like, say Amazon, for example, controls like mostly all like web services, like you feel like it feels a little dirty, like, and it's like a
Yeah.
monopoly of sorts. Yeah. So I guess that is why, like, I post about it sometimes with me, and like, I know that, like, people disagree with it, or people like might think I'm annoying or whatever, but like I will gladly, like take some of those like people just thinking I'm annoying, hoping that, like, people I'm friends with will just like kind of ignore it or whatever. And then I might get like one or two people that are like, you know what, like, I've had people like say to me in real life, or like message me and be like, like, this has actually like got me thinking. Just because, like, I know the feeling when I, was switching over, of how I felt like kind of stupid. And so I just, like, if there's like one person that can like kind of come to the same, realization or revelation, then I feel like it would be kind of cool, maybe.
I think that's, yeah, I think that's a good reasoning of why to do it.
Yeah.
I think that most often people aren't really doing it for those reasons. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
you usually have, I mean, to be honest, it's like most things that people write in their bio, for example,
Yeah.
especially when it's like labels that they give to themselves.
Right.
Like, it's not simply saying, I'm Lucas.
Yeah.
It's saying, well, this is my identity.
Right.
These are my pronouns. And
Yeah.
it's really, it seems like it's I'm trying to fit in kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing, rather
Mm-hmm.
than, oh, I'm just doing this because, like you said, your motivation is, well, maybe like one person forgets about all this annoying BS and just asks me, oh, why'd you do this? Like, I
Right.
think, or has like a meaningful conversation,
Sure.
listens to your motivation, or, maybe it gives you a critique or maybe not.
Right.
Maybe it makes them think about it. I also, in my bio, like, explained that I was in a diving accident, right? Or say
Yeah.
that I'm quadriplegic. I'm not trying to kind of mix in with this cultural trend of identity, because I actually
Right.
really don't subscribe to that personally, but I do it because I have had a few meaningful conversations with people where
Yeah.
that has been able to kind of bridge conversation or
Sure.
help someone, or, for
Right.
whatever reason, basically be a positive impact on
Right.
the world, or, just one person. I think that's a good thing to do, good motivation to have.
Right.
I think it's just interesting to bring those types of questions up with people,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who they maybe wouldn't be able to um, explain themselves, if
Yeah.
you want to
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
it that,
Yeah.
or they would simply say, "Well, I'm a vegan because it's healthier." It's like, well,
Right. Yeah.
that's not true. Like,
Yeah.
that's just not true. But if someone's gonna say, "Well, I'm this or that," and then give you reasoning or explain themselves, have a more complex, or even if it's simple, just kind of a more thought out kind of motivation for what they're doing, I think that it's
Right.
hard to not find that to be valuable in a
Right.
way. And I feel like there's not enough of that in
Right.
general.
Yeah, there's so I don't call myself it, but some people do. But some people like to try to skirt some of those like, concerns about not doing it for the right reasons. They call themselves ethical vegans, which is like technically what I would fall under. I just don't like say like calling myself that. So like yeah, I know some people that like maybe used to be vegetarian or vegan in the past and then they like fell off. And like a lot of times like the reasons are very shallow. Like they were just like, yeah, I just like didn't like meat, so I didn't do it for a while. Or like I don't know, like a bunch of people did it in my school, so like, I tried it out and then, it's really interesting to like hear like the various ways in which, they fell off. And I was like, yeah, it's not surprising that you fell off because it was like, you only had a shallow connection to it in the first place, right? And so like I like to think that at least in my case, which is why I like, I hope that even if like someone totally disagrees with me or even if, my friend who like is literally eating meat like as we speak, like, like they can still like have some respect for it because it's clearly something I've like thought about and something, I've like, you know, thought about from a lot of different ways and a lot of different perspectives. It's not just like, it's not just like a label I'm trying to fit in with. So,
As a vegan, make the case for not being a vegan.
oh man. Okay. Well, the
I feel
easiest
like it's
case.
easy.
Oh yeah, the easiest case um, is just economic, reasons. Like there's just like like the classic example that people use is like Inuit people in Alaska, for example. And then that's just like a matter of availability too. You know what I mean? Like you can't always go to like a supermarket and get a bunch of produce and things like that. That's probably like the most basic case. I think one of the more complex cases is that of like cultural inertia. So like, where people have been doing things for generations. It's just like it's not a conscious act. Like you're not sitting down and eating a food that may be a part of your culture and being like, I love this dead animal and like these like animal products. Like, you know what I mean? No one had like, you have to be like a psychopath to like have that sort of like conscious reflection. Like it's just like, you're eating your cultural foods, right? So like, and I
Thanksgiving.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And like that sort of cultural inertia is like hard to kind of like break or step out of. So like, I do see a like possible world in which there's like, in which like most people eat, plant-based, like whether it's like vegetarian or vegan or whatever. But like it'll obviously be like remarkably difficult to like for all the countries and various cultures throughout the world where meat is such like a central point in their diet. Um, so I think that's like a more, it's maybe not like a philosophically sound justification for doing it, but it's more of like a practical, like it's not always super simple, like especially if you're young and you're maybe not the one cooking. Like it's not always a super simple, like just like, oh, I'm gonna be vegan now, like your parents are like, no, you're not. Like we're the ones cooking dinner, like, you know. Like,
It's very true.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually never even thought of that. Yeah, like if you're a kid, especially a young kid, I mean, granted, why should you even be deciding to be vegan as like a small child? But
Yeah.
let's say you
Yeah.
did have the mental complexity to think about something like that and have that kind of motivation.
Yeah.
Your parents could just say, well, I mean, you're going to have better luck having cookies for every meal, but
Yeah.
that's
Right.
not what we're making. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Um, let's bring it all the way back. We went on this like tangent of
Yeah.
veganism, but
Yeah.
I guess I could say like as a vegan, do you have beef with anyone? No, I don't. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Are there any artists or like filmmakers that just irk you?
Oh man. Hmm. That's a good question. There probably are, but I'm trying
Did
to
you
think
ever
like,
watch something and you just I think I know one actually. I
Oh
know a
yeah.
music video producer that I think you don't like very
Oh,
much.
Cole Bennett, right? Yeah, that stuff does. That actually is a great example. Yeah, that'll be my pick because oh my god, like talk about just like mindless like derivative music videos. Like you know what I mean? Like I mean maybe at the time when they were like first coming out, it was like cool or distinct in some way, but like never seen someone just like dig into a style so much and just like it's just like I feel like it's like the same as what we were talking about before about how these things just become like a just like a self-replicating just like thing of just like a means of production where it's just it's just that's just like the easiest and like most popular and most like like valuable way to do things because like yeah, oh my god, every time I watch these videos I was like I know the type of budgets you're working with and like the fact that you can't do something cooler than this is like it's so frustrating to watch because it's like there's so many great artists that could that could just do so much more in the music video space. But, yeah.
Make the argument for Cole Bennett.
They are good for competitive.
Why is he
I
the
mean,
best music video producer to ever live?
he is, yeah. No, I mean, honestly, like that's the thing. Like, I'm never like as much as I don't enjoy them most of the time. I'm not gonna like. There's really no, it can be frustrating when it's like these resources could probably, make something cooler in different hands, but like at the end of the day, like there's enough projects to go around and like you can only hope that like over time tastes are going to get slightly more sophisticated and change in some way and people are just going to want something more interesting, so I don't know, there's
I
space
think
for
also
everyone.
yeah, in all fairness too, I think the kind of lyrical lemonade space and the genre of music that's commonly there, it's not necessarily the most, I don't know, I don't want to say creative because that sounds a little bit
Yeah,
harsh,
yeah,
but it is kind of more trendy, right?
right,
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of just hot topics. And also, I think in all fairness, I mean, he puts on concerts, right?
yeah,
The company, they put on big concerts, they pull up small artists, and I think maybe you could look at it from a standpoint as okay, like sure, maybe he's not the best when it
yeah,
comes to certain kind of vision that you're looking for or certain kind of production that you're looking for, but at the end of the day, maybe all that budget and the money that is made, he's saving budget, right? There's no doubt that he's saving budget on the videos. It's just two
yeah,
cars going around the track, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
that
yeah,
budget is then thrown into another venture that props up
right,
another artist that decides to then have a career that's more creative. So you could
sure,
look at it in a more full circle nature, uh, too.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like it's cool to see like any form of art like like being like not only popular but like accessible, like watching all his videos on YouTube, it's just like cool that you don't have to like go to like a gallery to like see them and stuff like that. So but yeah, that's what I mean, like I'm never going to be a hater like for real because like at the end of the day it's like propping up artists and like he started with SoundCloud artists, right? So like taking people that are just like posting their music like on a free platform, and them becoming like super successful recording artists
Yeah.
is cool.
Yeah. I think in the producer world, you have a similar critique of internet money,
Yeah,
like Taz Taylor and Nick Mira. Like,
yeah,
undoubtedly, Nick's like a super talented dude and just like crazy at making beats super fast
right,
and with some very famous people and known for blowing up. I mean, people like Juice World and um, other people like that. But
right,
commonly, they'll come under attack for either stealing sound, whether it's a melody from Sting and not giving him credit, or for, not being the most creative with their
sure,
platform or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, like a lot of these guys, I mean, first of all, they're young. Like I'm pretty
yeah,
sure they're all younger than us,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, I mean, first you got to, kind of take a step back and say, okay, there's probably valid criticism, but also like these are 18-year-old kids or
yeah,
maybe 20 whatever year old kids that are at this point basically running the entire entertainment scene
Yeah.
in some ways. Everyone's looking at them for what's going to happen next, and they're probably overwhelmed in a lot of cases with the amount of pressure that's on them, and just trying to have fun too,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's also a lot to be said of like, you know, dropping this sort of like idea that we all have to be like art critics. One, because I just think a lot of art criticism is so lame, but like it's also just like overly formal for like a bunch of like new context and stuff, like, you know, like stuff like new media stuff, like you're talking about, like YouTube type stuff. It's just like you can't, you know, it's like formal art criticism in like a museum context, like it just doesn't really translate to, you know, some of these new media forms. And so like, you know, like viewing value in different bits of their art is just like super, I think it like the right approach.